great that you are storming our webinar room in such a great number. We are expecting around 80, now 85 people, but we all understand what it's like nowadays. Probably some of you would like to have some time off just to pamper yourself with some relaxing scent, candles, coffee, and warm blankie. Great to see you guys. Fantastic time for ITEFL Poland, because we've got Maria. And you know what? If it hadn't been for Maria, we probably wouldn't have started our webinar project. Well, Maria, could you please just tell us, because it was you and Lucyna who were the first people who just kind of thought about this idea to have the webinars in Poland. Can you tell something more about it?
Yeah, I was very sad because I had, first of all, szczęśliwego nowego roku. Dobry wieczór. Jestem jak bardzo szczęśliwa, że tu. And now to get something more C2 and less A2. I was telling Lucyna, she emailed me to ask me why I wasn't at the conference and why I had to cancel so abruptly. And it was right after my mom had suffered a heart attack. And it was very, very abrupt because I would be coming, I was to fly out of Thessaloniki just the following day. So the whole thing went completely wrong and it couldn't be saved. And Lucyna emailed me and we talked about it. And I said how sad I was about missing the conference and my session and everything. And she said, well, how about setting it up as a webinar? And it was a great idea because it brought me closer to one of my favorite countries in the world, a country that I would choose to live if I could, and the language that I love, admire, and cannot have enough of, actually. So it was a great idea, and thank you, Lucyna, for suggesting it, and thank you, people, for coming to this, what has now become an annual January meeting for us.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Maria. Maria, I have known Maria for like, I would say 8 years.
Almost now, yes.
Yeah, and Maria has been such a professional speaker, such a fantastic pedagogue, but also very warm and always remembering about her friends, dear person to me. And I absolutely love the way that Maria speaks Polish. And
trying.
To my mind, it's absolutely amazing that someone would want to make effort to learn about the culture, to learn the language. So this is absolutely perfect. Here we are here. It's almost 40th, I think, 42nd webinar from the moment when Lucyna and Maria started this project. So now over to Lucyna.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Okay, I'm really happy to be here. And I really enjoy the fact that every single year, the very first webinar for IATF Poland for the past few years already has been Maria's webinar, yes? So we greet the new year with you. And that is a great feeling to have such positive energy at the beginning of each year. So very briefly, let me just say a few words about Maria. Maria is an academic. She's an owner as well as managing director of Input on Education platform. And Input is a company that provides academic and business support services to foreign language schools. And Maria also is a lecturer at the English Studies Department of the International Faculty of the University of Sheffield in City College. And she has been really heavily involved for a number of years with the running of TESOL Macedonia, Thrace, Northern Greece, and volunteers. She has been volunteering and working and cooperating with us, IATEFL Poland and IATEFL in general. So IATEFL World as well, with many presentations at IATEFL World conferences. I also would like to say to enumerate a few areas of research that Maria has been active with, like friendly teaching, the construction of teacher identity, understanding self-sustained learning environments. Sounds very complicated, but it is of key importance to all of us teachers. And to study these, Maria has been studying and self-teaching Polish. Yes, so this is what Martin and Maria have been talking about. Were talking about a moment ago. And before I just briefly refer you to the content of Maria's today's webinar, I just have to mention her webinar history. So 2017 by 2018 was Maria's first webinar organized by us, and it was on Wednesday, the 17th of January, and it concerned teacher development. And it was for teachers at different stages of their professional careers, and that was really the most important thing, because it encompassed all teachers at all stages of their career. And for this webinar, and I would like to mention it because that was really a nice thing to do. At that time we didn't have our own platform, and Maria invited us to her own virtual room. Then in 18 by 19, Maria had a webinar for Wednesday for us on Wednesday, and that was on the 16th of January, almost the same date, engaging learners in active learning. And then another webinar, 19 by 20, 21st of January, teaching and learning, cause and effect, or process of interaction. And this year, Maria is even going to have her webinar earlier, yes, on the 11th of January, and it will be about maximizing the potential of our course book, or your course book, as you wish. And I really like the way you summarize this, the content of your webinar, because the question is whether teachers are in virtual wonderland that they are promised to be in, or is it sometimes more like a nightmare? So there is this discrepancy that you are referring to in the summary of your webinar, and you will try to concentrate on the reasons why this discrepancy appears, and the various factors that might stop our teaching from being really functional. And this is something that we are all concerned about. And where does the course book belong in modern language classroom? Yes, we have all kinds of materials that we are bombarded with, and still the good old course book, modified, adapted, redefined, but is the key aspect, the key element of each of our course. Okay, so over to you. Thanks for being with us, and I'm all ears.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the warm reception. It's been one of my great moments in every year to come closer to this amazing country of yours. I love everything Polish, and it's been going on for years. I love this language, and loving a language and learning a language means learning a lot more about the country and the people. I need to apologize because we made the change about the way I would share my presentation, and probably being a bit over-reliant on technology, I did not share the last-minute changes I made. So forget about my title. My title is not Evaluation and Design of Teaching Materials. It is maximizing the potential of our course book. Also, I know that Lucina said that I work for City College, which is, or rather used to be, the international faculty of the University of Sheffield, but we're between universities, so we are now the Europe campus of the University of York. But this is just practicalities. So to start with, I would like to take you through an overview of what we're going to discuss today. Materials, this is a very broad term. We talk about teaching materials, and we mean anything from what we create to what we find published or what is digital and found online. So what are we dealing with? And why does that material sometimes not work as we expect it to? Therefore, how should we choose this material? What is the process of choosing? How can we be inspired to teach this material? Because we all deal with very busy lives. And finally, how can we adapt this material so that we respect its individuality and its unique selling points? So just to turn the tables, I would like you to spend a quiet moment. I will actually give you one full moment, that much, so that you can think, and perhaps if you can, share your thoughts in the chat. What do you want the material to do for you and for your learners? Obviously, this in its own right could be the entire session. So you can either choose to write about you or about your students. You can write one thing or more than one thing. For the time being, I will let you think. We're already getting some replies. I expect the material to help my students get a gist of new topics being presented, entertain and instruct, inspire and encourage. Teach, entertain, make learning easier. So we are all looking for something more than just material. We want a kind of teaching that will help our learners be eased into the material and at the same time give them a kind of structure, a framework which will aid their studying at home, encourage and inspire them, motivate them. We do not want course books which are totally difficult and inaccessible. Make them reflect on the content, and develop autonomy, of course. And actually, it's interesting to see how modern course books lead students to think of their own performance. And this makes them better aware of what they can produce and what they cannot produce. So to look at what bibliography gives us, there are several important to invite curiosity and inspire them. This thing about curiosity is very important and will become central in a minute or two when we discuss the chains and the use of student questions in teaching, the KWL chains. So the reason why we have course books is that they provide a main, let's say, vehicle source of exposure to the language. They also provide experience and information. And through the course book, the learners can actually get to see how the language is used. So authenticity becomes kind of an element as well. And these days, with YouTube and the digital communities and the fact that everything is a global village, it's easy to see how every course book, even young learners' materials, no matter if they are international or local projects, they become more authentic, more natural in the language involved and in the language the learners produce. Back in the 1970s, a student who learned English in Greece and went to London or to the United States or to Canada um, faced a kind of blank stare when he exchanged the first few utterances with the other participants in a discussion, because his language or her language was a bit dry, textbookish, contrived. None of these anymore. Material written for international and local markets these days tends to be informed by corpora and the way certain vocabulary is used in different phrases and in different communicative situations. But the coursebook is not there only to present language. It is there to help the learners produce the language. It's a springboard. And sometimes it's interesting to see how the material drives the learners to experience this passion, this burning desire to speak. And especially for us teaching either adults or young adults or teenagers at C2 level, this is very important. Material which is lukewarm, that doesn't interest anybody, that leads them to answers they already know, seems to be lacking in so many respects. The material also allows learners to become more aware of language. What is there for them to learn? Might that be grammar, vocabulary, idioms? How is it used? What is the context in which it is used? And at the same time, it explains the language that is found. It allows the learners to make discoveries, but these are guided discoveries. There is an aid next to the student. Now, one might say, of course, there is an aid, and that is the teacher. Of course, but we are aided by our coursebook in many respects. Now, the problem here is, I believe, how we feel about our coursebook. These are some of the analogies used by McGrath. I had to size them down. There were too many. So if you were told your coursebook is like a supermarket, like the Holy Bible, like a crutch, or like a springboard, which one would you reject or which one would you accept? I totally agree. I think that sometimes students feel that coursebooks imprison them, but we're going to talk about this. It has to do with the amount of material and the time that is available. So when you tell us which one you accept, give us a couple of thoughts. There are no right or wrong answers. There is an explanation and there is a validation for all answers. And not just unlimited vocabulary. I think there is a lot in the analogy of the supermarket. The supermarket doesn't limit my options. I go in and I can buy as little as a bottle of milk and a loaf of bread, or I can buy home furnishings, or I can buy a bit of everything, or I can go in and buy nothing. The Holy Bible is an interesting one. Would you like to tell us a little bit more? Grocery, yeah, definitely. It's interesting of thinking of language chunks as grocery shopping. I will get some derivatives for today's lesson and just a kilo of listening. No, make that half a kilo of listening. Clothing, of course. Of course. So just to run you through. So the supermarket, of course, you've pointed out it's unlimited choices. Also, there is no logic in any basket of shopping. It might be a housewife shopping just to go home and cook for today. It could be a family making the month's shopping. It could be a lonely single person stocking on cava, pivo, and all the lovely things, vino, and all the lovely things that we drink when we are alone and want to pamper ourselves. Uh, so the same happens with language. Sometimes we work a little bit more on that, or sometimes we choose the things that we buy around the central thing. So I will get this bottle of wine because I'm expecting some friends, and with that I should get some ham, and it should be smoked because the wine is so and so, and perhaps the cheese should be, and if I get that kind of cheese, perhaps I should get that kind of bread. And there you have it. It's your integrated skills class. Well, of course, not with bread and wine, but with structures. Regarding the Holy Bible, I would say that it reflects or older and more dated, perhaps about a kind of viewing of the material at the time when I was a student. It was against all logic that an exercise would be skipped, or that a task would not be done, or that things would be left uncovered, and pages would be left without us writing, because the book was absolutely correct. One of the first things I tell my students, because obviously we have many publishing houses in Greece, and they produce wonderful, wonderful material. We are spoiled for choice. Greece is one of the greatest markets, much like Poland, because our native language is of limited understanding and capacity in other countries. Of course, once again, much like Poland, there are a lot of Greeks who live in other communities in other countries, but then again, you cannot base your professional career on that, or on the fact that Greek is going to be understood, and it is a difficult language. So at that time, it was absolutely impossible to think of material as something that the learners and the teacher can mold into what they need. Is it a crutch? Sometimes it is used as a crutch. I would say we rely heavily on the course book. How much we rely depends on how much time we have, how seriously we take our lesson planning. I know that everybody thinks of planning as a very important aspect of what we do in our everyday educational pedagogic deliberation, but sometimes time is against us. So, for example, one could argue, why have the teachers make the students buy coursebook? Why doesn't the teacher generate the materials? Fantastic to say it. Incredible idea. Yes, all the way in. But you need a time of about 9 months not working, being absolutely sure that these are the learners you will be teaching, not anybody else, then selecting the materials, applying pretty much the criteria we will be discussing later, and then doing the whole work that the publishing house does in a micro scale for your learners. Those of us who have tried it for some reason know that it's easier said than done. Now, multiply that by 6 different groups, so and so many different levels, so and so different types of courses, and then it's easy to see that it's not feasible. It's too much work, and there is no reason. For me, the best analogy is the springboard. For me, the coursebook, instead of me writing the material, I trust the professionals to do their job, to research, to look at the corpora, to look at the international tendencies, to check and read the briefs of the exam boards for every level to study, the global scale, the Pearson global scale for English, the CEFR, to determine what makes this particular age group and this particular audience tick in these difficult times where even children are spoiled for choice, and they know so much about the world that nothing really impresses them unless it's clearly authentic and well crafted. And then they give it to me, and now I have my material. I don't have to create it. What do I have to do? Give it life. I am there to breathe into it and make it become an inspiration for me and the class to go higher and then experience these lovely blue waters. So why do we need course books, one might ask? Well, first of all, there is course books unify the material that we are going to put forward. One of the most difficult tasks for a teacher who teaches without material and collects it as he or she goes about the teaching of this particular class is to make sure that the material is properly graded, properly assembled, it's got variety, it gives information, it doesn't favor one type of reading over another, one type of task over another, it focuses on all skills, and it's properly crafted. So the scope and sequence of every course book shows us exactly where we are heading. And this also works as a way of informing other stakeholders, parents, for example, about the level of this class, how well learners are performing, how quickly they will be entering for exams. And it is, in a way, we are not scattered all over the place, as Agnieszka said. I'm so sorry if I've misread your name, but it's really very slight fonts. I can't really read them, not even with my glasses. And at the same time, we have an indicative sample of the language. We've got varieties. And these days, course books do not just stick to a certain type of pronunciation. We get to listen to learners, to speakers of many different accents of English. I think the other day, my learners were complaining because the speaker was Hindi and they couldn't understand. And I said, wait a minute, are you sure that if you go to a foreign country, the person serving you at the checkout line at the airport is not going to be somebody whose English is heavily affected by his L1 pronunciation? And this got us into discussing the whole issue behind world Englishes. For learners, it's a great thing for them to have everything under one title. These days, I'm trying to get my C1 learners who are very young. You would be, I believe, even for, I mean, I'm not sure which age Polish students take the Prof 2 exam, but ours take it as young as 14 or 13. Sometimes I shudder to say even 12. So my C1 learners are now in the second or third grade of junior high school. So 13, 14, I would say. I'm trying to get them to study not vertically, but also, let's say, all across the four components of the course book, because the vocabulary is recycled and because they shouldn't memorize, they should study for meaning and focus on this meaning. It's very hard for them. So now when I think of them being alone and trying to systematize this vocabulary by using dictionaries like I did when I was a British Council C2 student, yeah, okay, different times. And there weren't even any digital dictionaries. I had to alphabetize the vocabulary that I wanted to look up so that I could find it more easily in the dictionary and I wouldn't be leaving through the dictionary 150 times. It also helps the learners to reinforce what we've done in class in a way which is meaningful, systematic. And yes, I will say at times it feels that they are spoon fed, but I wonder what would happen if they were not spoon fed. Perhaps one might argue they might perform better and take greater responsibility for their own organization and their own learning. Yeah, I agree. I feel that at times it would be so. And in other times, they would just fold. They would just give up and stop trying. And then we would have even more complaints from parents that some learners cannot follow the lesson. The course book obviously makes revising more easy and it supports the learners every step of the way. For us, I would start with time saver. It saves a great amount of time. The fact that we know where we're going. Sometimes planning classes is so much hard work that I wonder how people seriously think that teachers could design their own materials. Entirely, I mean. It provides support. Sometimes course books might even teach teachers. I owe the way I teach writing to a writing C1, C2 I won't say course book, skills book that was published in the early 2000s, and it used to refer to the previous format of the C2, the Cambridge Proficiency Exam, where the writing was always either a discursive article or an essay, and or a letter to the editor. And this was, for me, the first year that I had C1 writing classes. And it was a focused class. It was only C1 writing. I can't ever be thankful enough to those people because they supported my own understanding of the tasks. They supported my own teaching. And despite the fact that it wasn't a fancy book with an interactive whiteboard software and a few hundred different components and microsites, it actually worked. It gave me what I needed. Yes, sometimes planning takes longer than the lesson itself. I can make two analogies which might explain why they are a bit stereotypical. I think that lesson planning is like cooking. It takes so much time to find the recipe, go shopping, start building the food, the dish, and then cook it. And then everybody is around the table, and in 10 minutes they are done, and we're washing the dishes. And it's so disappointing sometimes, but lessons do not fade away. We keep record of what we have done and we build on to that. So conformity, standardization, and also it will be it's a great way to know that we have something to fall back on. We shouldn't always think of experienced teachers teaching B2, for example, and leading students to a B1 or a B2 exam. We should think of novice teachers. We should think of teachers who might be studying for their MA or facing any kind of personal or professional problem or challenge. They cannot be expected. I'll give you an example about professional challenges. Up until a few years ago, when the things with the economy in Greece were really, really bad, not that now it's any great shakes, but then again, we've got COVID and everything is a bit better than it was 5 years ago. But the thing is, at this stage, teachers used to teach literally around the clock. You cannot expect teachers to produce original material in this case. So going on to the next part, what are materials like? Well, these days it takes a village to create a course book. And those of us that spend a lot of time either organizing conferences or going to conferences, and a lot of our friends or professional connections work for publishing houses, we know how much of this material has to be produced simultaneously. We are talking about, I won't say factories because the material is very well designed and very well planned. This is one of my favorite books. It's one of the greatest samples of how CLIL can work. And for me, it sets the bar so high because what comes out of this book as the linguistic gain that the students get is proportionately more than what we see in the scope and sequence. And this is something for us to keep in mind because we will be talking about how the scope and sequence defines the choices that we make. So we've got course books, we've got workbooks, grammar books, additional grammar books or spelling and writing books. Then we've got the teacher's book that it's an actual mini teacher training course introducing us to how we should use each of the components and alternative ways of introducing vocabulary and alternative ways of using the posters and the flashcards and the mini videos and the longer videos at the end of every unit and the stories at the back and the extra material. And there is a trap there. The trap is actually not for the teacher, but for the entire school. It's very easy not to see how much material there is, opt to buy everything, put everything on the student's list, and then be faced with a deluge of material that cannot be covered. Or to do everything, absolutely everything, up until Christmas, and then realize, oh my God, 1/3 of the semester or 1/3 of the academic year is gone, and we are in Unit 3, skates on, running people. Not a good idea to put forward either to parents or to students. So This is why it is very important. It is essential to check the materials package, not simply the material in the course book, so that we can see how this book can fit in. For example, just to mention a personal story, when Oxford Discover was first published in 2014, I didn't see it as a teacher. I saw it as a freelance trainer hired by the Thessaloniki branch of OUP to do some training for teachers. And my first question was, what? 18 units for frontisteria, for foreign language schools? They barely manage 12 or 10. How do you expect them to do it? Obviously, number one was not the one that was used in Greece because it didn't fit the CFR levels with junior classes and senior classes. We started with Oxford Discover 2, but still, same thing. When I started teaching the book, I realized that the issue of the units is actually not in the it's not a problem if we pace the material. It's the way it's been structured, it's the way it's been crafted, but this takes some sort of inside knowledge for the book. So what is the position of the material? I think I went too far down. Yes, I did. How fast does this thing move? Let me get my bearings so that I can. Okay, perhaps I can change it. Yes, I can change it from here. So we are talking about a system of interaction, a system in which the teacher, the learners, and the material all work like well-oiled cogs around a main aim. So the teacher plays obviously the greatest part because the teacher introduces the material to the learners. The way I see the material affects the way my learners are going to see the material. If I believe in it, if I think that the material is trustworthy, convincing, actually a mini miracle in my class, my learners receive that from me and they feel empowered and perhaps lucky to be learning and to be using this coursebook. This kind of passion and this feeling that this is great material that we are working with actually catches on from the learners to the students. No matter who likes the coursebook, unless the teacher likes the coursebook, nothing can happen. The learners will remain unconvinced and they will go on hating the coursebook, though hating is a great and very heavy word. Now, the coursebook plays a major role in how we plan everything in our school year. So it affects our day-to-day planning and also our long-term planning. Sometimes our assessment methods are affected. Is this a modular course? Does it ask learners to take a bigger, longer test every 2 units, every 4 units? Are the units more like lessons? Are they double page spreads? Are they, let's say, 4 pages long? Is every page one lesson, but the full double page spread is considered a 90-minute lesson? This also works very well because it allows publishers to cater both for private schools, public schools who have 45-minute lessons, and for foreign language schools that have 90 or 75-minute lessons. Now, the material also gives an indication of how mean it is. There is material that really shows its teeth from the first time. I mean, from the get-go, we open the page and it's full of tasks and more tasks and useful language and look this and look that and pictures upon pictures, and nothing seems visible because so much is crammed. There is also another type of material where grammatical phenomena keep springing up every page you turn. There is no page without something to do with grammar. And one has to wonder, if the material is so grammar heavy, when am I going to get time to get my learners to assimilate this, incorporate it into some sort of Fourier practice, and get them to produce the material? This is what I mean by the second bullet point. The coursebook in a way shows us its intentions. Does it intend to give enough attention to skills and language, formal language teaching that revolves around the idea of teaching skills, vocabulary, grammar. For the learners, the way they see the material, so if the material is visually appealing, if it's entertaining, if it gives them if it gives them a format through which they can immediately understand things. I will refer to a course book that I've been using in the last 2 years, Go Getter 1 by Pearson Longman. And a simply amazing book because they have found a way to present grammar through videos. And they've got different types of videos for different types of learners. And they're soap opera video, as they call, where there are child actors pretending to be friends and they act out their adventures. These characters grow up in tandem with the learners. So the later we are in the series, the older the child actors that play the teenagers. This is very important because our learners can identify. But the script is so amazing. It makes you want to watch it. It makes you want to see the next thing. And it's not at all textbookish, as I was saying before. The material also comes between the teacher and the learners. If the material is stale, if it doesn't move, if it's too much and of the same kind, obviously it doesn't give learners what they need in order to develop their skills and hone their skills. So really, the choice is not if we need the course book or if we don't need the course book. I would say we do need the course book. The thing is, do we run courses which are course book based or course book led? In the first case, the teacher is the owner of the lesson and the material is a means to an end. We use it to take into account all that we can and to give our learners the best possible version and the best possible vehicles through which they can learn specific language chunks or vocabulary chunks. There is room for the teachers to adapt and take their learners into consideration, add their own touches, remove material and add material, and there are compromises that teachers can make, especially if there are time issues. The idea of coursebook led takes us back to what we said before about the coursebook being the Holy Bible. In this case, it is given and it should be followed as it is. It's content based, it's prescriptive, it cannot be touched. The coursebook is king and the teacher runs to serve the coursebook. Teachers can become, let's say, almost robots. They go into this mode of linear teaching. So let's open our books. Okay, read the first sentence. Fantastic. Can you supply the word? Yes. Next one, number two. Yes. Keep on, read on. And then the whole discourse in the classroom become a set of imperatives, or even it becomes non-language. 21, B. 23, C. 24, D. And what are the learners producing in the meantime? Nothing. It is, in a way, coursebook-led courses are the version of profit maximization. The reason I'm saying that is that in other industries, one can order 10 million objects and get a better price, so they can sell retail at a better price. In our case, we cannot do that. The coursebook costs a certain amount of money. A teacher costs a certain amount of money. But if the coursebook is what I would say brainless and mindless, these coursebooks really do not exist. And if they do exist, they don't really work well in classes where the teacher wants to have some kind of say on what he or she teaches. These courses can be taught by anyone. And this is not to be confused with what I said before, that sometimes teachers are at the beginning of their career or they're just now starting to teach a particular level. The mentoring and the support of the teacher is a given. The teacher is not an authority. The teacher needs support, and it's no shame to require support through the coursebook. Interestingly enough, there was a time when there were no teachers' books containing answers because the teachers knew everything, and it would be insulting for the teacher to be given answers. But these days, it would be absolutely unthinkable not to provide answers. So this shows the change in mentality. Coursebook-led courses are mainly good for the administration. They get the director of studies to stand like the big brother eye over all the classrooms of the same level and say, you're behind, do that, fast forward this, yes, go there, don't waste time, finish this in 2 lessons. But this takes away all the fun from learning and actually doesn't lead to learning. It's superficial. um, so where exactly does the coursebook fall into? The idea is that, do we always use coursebook? Do we never use coursebook? I think that the idea of the coursebook as an inspiration for the teacher, as an organizer of the material, the language level, and the contents, is somewhere in the middle. And then when we reach the other end of the pendulum, we have teaching methodologies such as Dogme, Teaching Unplugged, which are extremely exciting. And to be honest, I would like to try them out, but I'm not sure how they would develop in the fullness of time. A lot of methodologies like these leave many questions when we think, so in the fullness of time, how does that develop? How does that move on? How do I get my learners to hone their skills? Lucina mentioned before what I said about the promised Eden. Unfortunately, because of the transition effect, you're not going to see the promised Eden. I'm not sure if I can move it. I cannot move it. So the thing is, we are promised Eden. There is a lot of rhetoric that goes around that promises teachers no planning. The IW tool is there. You don't have to do anything. Even your lesson plan is made for you. But I don't understand this rhetoric. The less the teacher invests in exploring and studying the material, actually sizing it up or down to fit her class, the more the material remains foreign to the class. So what happens is that we are promised Eden, and then we experience a great deal of frustration. We're like, what is this? Why was I told that it works miracles and it doesn't? It works miracles provided the teacher is on top. Some of the problems that we face. First of all, the students do not tune in to just everything. They tune in to things when they are presented to them in a way according to their age group and to their particular interests. The materials designer has written for a shapeless, faceless, genderless audience of no race, no religion, no ethnicity. They are writing about nobody and everybody at the same time. It is very difficult to put faces on such learners. And no, one size doesn't fit all. Every B1 class is not the same B1 class. And academics like McGrath and Tomlinson keep repeating that there are great discrepancies. We should be aware of the level at which our learners enter B2 or B1. So a weak B1 learner is as needy as an A2 learner. And if I give too much material and too demanding material, I'm not actually supporting his or her learning. I'm demotivating them. I'm actually encouraging negative transfer, and I'm not helping them grow. And quite correct, every class is unique. Every class is a new universe, and we are the people who bridge this gap, the teacher. Another issue is how much material the course book includes, not simply per page, but per unit, in different components. Even if the material is, let's say, a bit insidiously hidden and it sneaks up on you. I used to have a course book which I adored, and it had great readings, and it was a very successful course book. Sadly, I believe it's going out. I won't mention its name because I believe it needs to be adjusted now with the changes in PET. But there were grammar phenomena springing up while we were doing writing. And of course, one knows that writing is coming up, but additional writing, additional grammar with additional units from an additional unit from the grammar book, that adds to the load. And this also makes the learners feel that they are chasing their tail. So when are we going to relax? When are we going to play a game? When are we going to do some speaking? When are we going to work in groups? The thing is not for teachers to do speaking when the exams come. The thing is for us to engage in speaking every single time, to get learners to understand that the culture and the mentality of our class is such that we do everything via exchanging opinions. Before reading, we speak. After reading, we speak. Before listening, before writing, before, even when we do grammar, we exchange opinions and we use the grammar structures that we learn. Finally, every course book has a certain teaching methodology and teaching principles behind it. If we are not careful, we might be landed with a course book that features methodologies, ideas, principles we don't agree with. And then this whole thing starts where we force the material to become different. I'll give you an example. I've mentioned my experience with Oxford Discover. So it's, as I said before, one great course book. And I've experienced learners producing grammatical structures they had not been taught. Granted, I was very lucky with my learners, but it also worked with not so motivated or committed learners, let's say talented learners. I was very surprised to see them producing a present passive at some point. I didn't even mention it. I just silently stood there. And then another student was trying to produce a past continuous passive, and he couldn't because of that being in there. But it was obvious that the material was working from within them. Now, every time I had a session on Oxford Discover, there was this question, because Greece is a very grammar-oriented country regarding the teaching of languages. If you ask any person on the street, they will tell you language is grammar. Yes, but at any rate, the questions were always about the third conditional, the past perfect continuous, the future perfect continuous. And when there's so much wealth and innovation in the way the language is presented, and learners are led to become better aware of what they know and how they learn, why do we bother about a single structure? Finally, as I mentioned before, the way the teachers look at the material defines the way the material fares in class. It doesn't matter where we teach. It doesn't matter if we have an interactive whiteboard. Parenthesis here, the interactive whiteboard can be a great sucker of energy, and it can also be a major trap because it puts a nice tech gloss over the idea of click, 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 and linear teaching. This is not the kind of teaching we would like to encourage for longer periods of time. It could be okay as a necessary break because we are revising, or we reach the end of the unit and we've got quite a lot of activities, or we're getting closer to the actual exam and we're exam cramming. But it should be the exception, not the rule. So no matter how technologically evolved or deprived our classroom is, no matter how many learners we have, the material fares much better when we believe in its potential. So what are the actual factors that hinder it from working? First of all, poor choices made initially. The second is the promised land of Eden. You will not have to plan. No long-term planning, no short-term planning. Here you go. This is your scheme of work. This is your syllabus per week. Yes, but how does that relate? How does that help the teacher get to relate with his or her material? If I am not aware of what comes next, if I am not aware of how this material will thicken or perhaps become a bit more manageable over the weeks, how will I introduce that to my learners? Lack of teacher support, when the teacher feels that there is nobody who shares his or her way of seeing the material, this can be very frustrating, which is the reason why I believe instead of getting teachers to plan an entire course book and design their own materials, what is much easier to do is to get them to organize think tanks on specific course books they all share and teach. And they can rant and rage as much as they want about all they do not like. And of course, the publisher would thank them if they send an email saying, listen, we've been working with so and we find that this is great feedback. And also support and group discussion. So this book has this problem, particularly long grammatical presentations. How do we go about solving this problem? Or too many PDFs to be shared with the learners. Which ones do we keep? Which ones are going to be, let's say, kept for summer or Easter or Christmas homework? All of these are decisions to be made in a kind of way that transcends the boundaries of the one class. And the last one is holding on to a particular course book for a longer period of time. So coursebook evaluation is one of the things that we do usually at the end of the school year. Some of us might leave it till later, see what else comes on, or perhaps the full package of the material is not ready. The truth of the matter is that the more course books we have to review, the less in-depth the analysis can be. This is what leads us to mistakes. We are landed with, let's say, 5, 6 different course books, each with a whole mountain of components. And unless we do this very nice, dear, you teach this level, evaluate it and bring it back to me on Monday, quasi empowering for the teacher, but not actually empowering the teacher, we won't get done. And what happens is that we stay on the surface and we make the wrong choices. So the suggestion here is that we need to make what in bibliography is known as a first glance evaluation or an external evaluation. External as in we do not get in depth. How do we make this external evaluation? Remember, I mentioned the scope and sequence. These are the pictures from GoGetter, as you can see. The scope and sequence can show me how the material is divided, if the material is representative of what would be taught at this level, how much attention falls on skills, how much attention falls on issues that have to do with linguistic accuracy, such as the teaching of vocabulary, derivation, if the level allows for it, phrasal verbs, so on and so forth. And in a way, during this stage, I stick to the outer mantle of the whole course book. The cover, the scope and sequence, perhaps a leafing through. Do I need to study this further? Or is there something that puts me off or something that stops me from using this, in which case it goes out. And then out of the 5 course books, I am landed with 3 that perhaps are more manageable and I can look into. Now, there is this lovely acronym, Catalyst, which in a way helps us see what we should focus on when we examine a course book as a first glance. This first glance determines keep or reject, just that. So is it communicative enough? What are the aims? Is it teachable? Are there any available components? What are they? What is the level? Now, the level regarding this, even McGrath expresses a disagreement with Grant, saying that it's difficult to understand the actual representation, interpretation of the level by looking at the scope and sequence and the covers. Obviously, for that, we would need to read texts and see how the vocabulary from the text is used, what kind of vocabulary there is, how this was introduced before, so on and so forth. Your impression of the book, would it arouse the student interest? Is it tried and tested? So this also includes the reputation of the publisher and what the publisher is famous for. We all know that there are certain publishers who are more, let's say, groundbreaking. They focus more on how to put actual communication into the staple diet of the class. Now, the coursebook evaluation needs to become more personal. And to do that, we need to soul search. Why am I changing my coursebook? What was it in the previous coursebook that made it successful? Which were the features that I particularly found helpful and I was fond of? and which are the ones that I would like to avoid, which were the weak areas of the previous course book. This helps me to define the profile of the material, but I also need the profile of the learners. And the two profiles, so the needs analysis for the course and the needs analysis, the profile of the learners, lets me understand what kind of material I'm looking for. I can hear the argument at this stage. How do I know the learners I will be teaching? It might be September and I have no idea who is going to join this class, if students will come, if it's a private school, or if these particular students will be there, if more students will come in. Obviously, we do not know details, but we know quite a lot, and this is the important part. We can only, regarding the learner's profile, we can guess in this case. So what are the things that we should focus on? The age group, the gender, and every time my students at City College and I discuss that, there is this question, why the gender? Well, topics. Are the topics interesting enough? I won't say that there are course books for boys and course books for girls. I wouldn't even dream of saying that. But sometimes we tend to have topics that they are too, let's say, boy friendly, and some which are too girl friendly. And for some reason, too many units that focus on sports or action movies or something that girls might not find so interesting, or perhaps the other way around, boys might not find so interesting, creates problems, creates demotivation. I would like topics to be non-stereotypical. I would like them to be seen from an original point of view, something that creates unexpectedness. Unexpectedness is a very valued quality these days, even for, YouTube videos. How the level is represented. So is it a demanding book for B1? Is it an okay book? Is it an easy book for B1? Is it an easy book that takes weak learners from let's say A2 plus, but not quite B1 level, and guides them through to B1 plus? That is also interesting. The purpose behind language learning, and at this stage, I would like to mention that it's very important when we choose course books, especially for exam classes, to be focused on what we are choosing the course book for. In Greece, we have this large umbrella of exams that have taken the seal of approval from the Greek Ministry of Education and the special authority that authorizes them. The thing is that we cannot have, let's say, 7 or 8 different exams present in a course book. No matter how the CFR is represented, we need to know which exam we are working on, how we are teaching this level, and how we are going to introduce our learners into the different exam tasks. And, for example, what the exams feature that might hinder some students' progress. To give you an example, in Greece, American exams, like the Michigan exams, are very popular. They are more, let's say, student-friendly. Their format is easier. Therefore, many learners prefer these days to Cambridge exams. But if I have a mixed audience of learners who would like to take the Michigan exams and the Cambridge exams, I cannot choose a course book that trains learners for Michigan, because in that way I deprive the Cambridge learners from a lot of exposure to more analytical, more demanding, more varied types of reading, listening, writing. The ECPE candidates won't suffer if they are taught a CPE coursebook, but the CPE candidates would suffer. Also, am I teaching an Ielts class? If yes, then I cannot choose a C2 proficiency coursebook. I have to find something which is specifically for Ielts. Another important element is the amount of time we'll have. Is this a 1-year course? Is it a 9-month course? Is it a course that will span into the first months of summer? Or it will also cover some intensive extra weeks in September so that it can lead to the final leg, which is the exam course? Will the students have enough time to study at home? And how much homework will this course book incur? If it has all those components and we decide to work with all these components, do we have time to check all of them? And how will this checking affect the in-class work that is done in the next lesson? Learning style preferences. Is it a course book that favors all learning styles? And how does it cater for the needs of my learners? So, as you can see, we are in a process of elimination, starting with the external, then the first class evaluation, and then going on to the in-depth evaluation. The broader one, the wider one, is more based on what we get as a vibe from the material. The more in-depth focuses on criteria that are informed by our own experience. And this leads us to the next thing that we're going to discuss, which is the process. So we need to be very careful in how we choose our evaluation criteria. It's best if we group them in certain categories. It's very important to formulate them clearly. Tomlinson and Masuhara make a clear division between criteria that are evaluation criteria, and they cannot be answered with yes or no. It's one thing to say there is enough free speaking for learners. So tasks which require learners to initiate speaking and sustain a monologue, or there are enough tasks which help learners take part in 3-part discussions, for example. This is a description. Now, the evaluation would be on a scale of 1 to 10, how well does this coursebook work on so-and-so, or the workbook covers grammatical structures effectively. And at this stage, there is extensive bibliography on how specific the criteria need to be, because if we keep adding, perhaps in a sentence with 2 or 3 criteria, we cannot say yes or no. We cannot put a tick. We cannot use the Likert scale. And it's very obvious why we cannot do that. There are 2 criteria. There are 2 different ideas. Perhaps it does the first one and it doesn't do the second one. It's also very important if different teachers are evaluating the same material using that the same questionnaire, which is what we would expect the think tank to do. So the think tank arranges meetings, we analyze our needs, we profile the learners, we establish the criteria, and then we decide on a response format, and we are clear as to what we mean by the criteria. So some of the usual, wrong arrow. Some of the usual categories we see are the predictable ones: design, language, content, subject matter, and also practical considerations. It doesn't help if the coursebook is too expensive, if we have to wait for another 2 months to see the rest of the material, or if there won't be any IWB, or if there will be problems in the supply of the coursebooks. These are practical things. Even the durability of the books is an issue. But they are practical issues that might stop us from entering a working relationship with this particular title. In a communicative classroom, it is very important to place the bulk of interest when reviewing materials into how meaningful the communication that comes out of this coursebook is. How are the learners encouraged to communicate? How do they engage in these activities? Are there steps and stages that get the teaching of every little chunk to become a pre-stage for a bigger and more important speaking or writing task that will call on every piece of language, every structure the learners have learned so far? This transforms the classroom. The material has the opportunity to transform our classroom, make it into a safe place where the learners can learn in a way that doesn't embarrass them. They are not asked, This is the problem with badly designed material. The learners are asked to do things they have not been trained for, or they have not been taken through the different, let's say, steps that lead to the final stage. Another issue is, first of all, how much free speaking the learners can do. I'm really mortified by how much chunked speech the learners produce in class. We imprison them in two-word answers, and we really make it very unfair for them, because we ask them, when there is a mock exam, we ask them to do a lot more than we give them room to do in class. This is not down to the material or down to us, or nor does it say that we are unprepared or bad professionals or anything of the sort. It's an issue of time. It's very time consuming to try to develop everything. But learners should have the chance to express their own meaning, not simply answer questions to which we already know the answers, and even more, they should have the chance to pose questions. They have forgotten what questions are about. They ask questions only in the form of, what time do we finish? Or is there a long time before the break? Oh. But they should really learn how to use questions. And the idea of communicative should extend beyond the idea of exam speaking. It should encompass a lot of different principles and methodologies regarding skills. So these in-depth evaluation ideas can be grouped into institutional factors that are related with the length and the density of the course, the teacher factors, and the learner factors. But we shouldn't forget that evaluation of material is a cyclical process. It lasts all year round. So first we have the pre-adoption evaluation. Then during the first year, it's a good idea to take notes to see how the material performs, what we need to be careful of, what we like, what we don't like, what we expected to be more difficult, and it's actually easier. It's easy to forget these things, but if anything, this idea of teachers working in groups, creating criteria, reviewing, writing needs analysis and learner profiles, and then taking notes, turns teachers into reflective practitioners. And it is actually a most useful way of action research that does good to us, to our learners, to our classes. We need to focus on how the material affects the learners, and perhaps compare. It's also when we take notes during the first year, when we use the course, it's easy to see how this material works as opposed to what we thought it would be like in class. Then during at the end of the year, we need to review the material once again, this time for the post-use evaluation. So the material has been used throughout the year, and now we are there to see what it has yielded. And in this case, we are not looking at projections, we are looking at actual data that has come from our experience, our notes, the tests of our students, questionnaires, perhaps student focus groups and review interviews, even parents for younger learners. Once I was very happy to be told by one of the mothers in our school that her children insisted when they went on holidays that one of the CDs they took with them was the CD with the songs from the Coursebook, and they insisted on playing it in the car and listening to it, and they even acted the songs and whichever dialogues were available. And she thought that this was a great way of maintaining English and keeping it present. So sometimes it's good to talk to parents about it. Now, if we look at the life circle of a coursebook, I would say that the first year is just an exploration. The first year means nothing, especially if we are not lucky with our class or we are too lucky with our class, and we get exceptional students who whiz through the material and produce more than we would expect. The second and the third year are the times when we know the material, we have a feeling of how to use it, what to go through earlier, what to give more time for. It's the time of maturity. The fourth year is the beginning of the end. And as I usually say, this is the time when teacher suffers of either textbook fatigue or textbook over familiarization. Once I was sitting at the balcony of my house, I think it must have been it was May, and I was planning a proficiency class based on one of my favorites, masterclass by OUP, the blue one for the recent changes in the exam. And as I was lesson planning, I could see the page and I kept thinking, okay, so the box with the vocabulary before the listening, I'm going to do this. So I tried to think of anticipated problems, and my mind went blank. And I was like, why can't I see my page? And then I realized that I was just looking into my mind's eye. I hadn't opened the book. I had the book up there. Of course, not the exact words in the box, but if you know the book off the top of your head, the book has stopped surprising me. It's not a challenge for me. Therefore, it's time to say adios. Thank you. I know that there is a lot of material that has been created, but now we need to say hello to another course book. Unfortunately, post-use evaluation is not a common thing. Usually it's a very quick question and answer in the kitchenette as we're making coffee. So how did you like it? Oh, it was great. Yeah, they learned so much. Fantastic. Keep it next year. Yeah, fine, sure. And that's it. But if we want the material to really keep producing, it should be a part of our diet, and it should be a large-scale evaluation. It should involve more than one of the teachers who taught this book. It should even take the learners and their different orientations into consideration. So we also need to look at the material critically while we're using it. So as we saw it before and as we see it now, is it relevant to our learning aim, to our teaching aims and the learning outcomes we want to achieve? If it is totally irrelevant, Harmer would say, why did you choose it? Were we that misinformed? What made us think that this material would help out in this case, and what didn't help us in this case? Or what tricked us into thinking that this material could do that? Or is it totally relevant and helps us produce what we want to? So we are involved in a kind of concentric circles. We start with the local, which is the more focused, the profile of the learners, the learning objectives, the syllabus at the time, the particular constraints or conventions around our school. Then we go into the middle circle, which is slightly wider, talks about the amount of relevant material that is on offer in this particular course book, the gaps and how they can be filled. So what types of activities we need to provide to simply offer more variety. And then we have the outer circle, which is the broadest, the second language acquisition theories, the modern pedagogies, the beliefs in 21st century education. And these theories form the backbone of every course book. So how are they reflected in the course book tasks? Something that we very often do, and is the fact that we adapt course books. And this was the second point that I made before. While we're promised Eden, we're kind of told that we won't have to put in any additional work, but this doesn't really work. McGrath, quoting Haycraft, thinks that one of the reasons we need to adapt is to make sure that the material is accessible to the learners. In junior classes, very young learners have predictably similar needs, but this changes the older they get. From intermediate level onwards, there are huge discrepancies between how they understand the material. So this is why we need to look into what the material requires us to do, how we can bridge it so that our learners can all profit and gain from it. Some gains from adaptation as outlined by McDonough. First of all, it makes the teaching, the actual content of the course book become more appropriate, work better. It might help the material be repurposed and therefore used more than once. It might make it more appropriate for our teaching situation. and it could help intrinsic deficiencies. So perhaps add variety or avoid traps. I will show you one such trap later on. Now, we shouldn't forget that course books are based on specific methodologies. And granted that we cannot see the clear form of any methodology represented in any course book, we see the material developers' understanding of this theory or the notion that goes behind it. But at the same time, we need to remember to draw some, let's say, safety boundaries regarding the adaptation of material. Adapting is ethical. We need to make the material accessible to our learners, but over adapting poses two questions. Why did we decide to work on this book? Why did we actually get this book on our bibliography if so and so has to be left out and so has to be added, and that doesn't work, and the other thing is not practical enough? Another issue with over-adapting is that we force the course book to become something else. Remember what we said before when we looked at that pendulum. The material has a kind of methodology. We cannot decide to work with Oxford Discover and turn it into a grammar translation or an audiolingual course book. It's a CLIL course book. It oozes CLIL creativity, and we cannot force this characteristic out of the coursebook. If we do that, then we have a car without an engine. Therefore, it's not useful anymore. So, in order to make the material, to decide what kind of adaptation needs to be made, teachers need to plan. I know that at times teachers tend to rush, create material, and then see what, how, and where this is going to be used. But the most important part of our planning is understanding, visualizing what will happen in class. Personally, every time I plan my classes, I can see my learners and how each one of them can contribute different things. And at times when I know that I have a particularly challenging task, I feel sad if the student hasn't come yet, because I feel, oh my God, I was relying on that student to do that, or I was relying on that student to work in this group so that they could do this. Fortunately, they show up at some point, but it's part of my visual planning. My visual planning let me see the problems on which we are going to stumble. And these become my anticipated problems. Then I get to see how each of these stages will be just a stop in the whole process of helping my learners and easing them into the next stage. For this reason, I feel particularly happy that I stumbled on this term, backwards planning. And what is backwards planning? I need my learners to be able to describe their house using vocabulary related with furniture and there is, there are, giving some kind of support in the form of useful language. So this might sound like a name, like a learning outcome, but in a way it clarifies where I want my learners to get. And this gets me to think of what I need to supply before they need it. Once I was planning a lesson for a C class, a A2 plus, and I thought, okay, I will get the learners to brainstorm emergencies. And then I thought, how much vocabulary do they know? What's an emergency? An explosion, a crash, a fire breaking out. I could see that they knew very little. They may have known fire. Some of them might think of fire police or fire car as a paraphrase for fire engine. But really, what about ambulance? Would they remember the word? Of course, it's an international word written on ambulances, but have they noticed it? Do they know how to pronounce it? Will they dare say it? Will they trust their knowledge? Has it fallen into their radar of observation? But this point helped me understand that I needed another task before this. Now, None of this created any kind of tangible material. I did not create a worksheet. I simply created a mind map and got them to see how this would form and how this would, and in a way, supplied the useful language that they needed. And then we spent time working on this so that they could be eased into a text, which was about a crash that had happened and what happened later. So, in a way, we see the material while planning as a means to an end. It's a vehicle. We use it to achieve our aims and our learning objectives. And at the same time, our lesson plan becomes the greatest way to evaluate the material in use. How does it assist my students? Does it support me? Does it give me options, or does it give me one way, one path through which I can do everything? Does the material function as a source and as a springboard for me? Does it keep giving me inspiration? And just to mention Oxford Discover once again, it's a great idea that this particular coursebook gives teachers a great way to introduce the text, to give them credits, engage learning, and look, as well as Great Wonders does the same. We've got different ways, different pathways to introduce new modules and new units. And when we see all this array of material, it might seem daunting, but we don't have to use all of it all the time. So the next question would be, where do I find inspiration? Well, first of all, let the material speak to us. It's too much to go on ahead of ourselves and create material before actually planning the lesson, and before looking at in every little nook and cranny of the course, so that we can ensure that what we are going to create doesn't already exist in some form or another. Personally, I don't agree with the idea that workbooks are for homework and they should be kept to be used at home. If I like one of the tasks and it helps me, I will steal it from homework, use it in class, and learners can have one thing less to do at home, so that they can focus on other things which need to be done. We might also find what we are looking for. For example, great questions and great inspiration about how to introduce a topic can be found in the speaking part of this unit, which might be 4 or 5 pages further below. In levels like B2, C1, C2, this will make little difference. Students will still be able to answer the questions, and it might be a great bridge. And it also takes away from this feeling, oh my God, I haven't done that, and I've got the questions to do. So it eases our burden of work as well. The learners can be also a great source of inspiration. They are part of our visual reenactment. It's also part of the material, and our teaching should give voice to the learners. I particularly feel that chains that use and activate the learners' questions are particularly useful. And I believe this is inquiry-based teaching, and inquiry-based course books have found a great first step in Oxford Discover. So those chains start with what the learners know, then they go on to what they want to learn. So we start with brainstorming. Let's talk about celebrations. Let's brainstorm facts about celebrations. Celebrations are all about food. Celebrations bring families together. Celebrations mean presents. They are exciting. So learners can write down anything. And this is a very, let's say, democratic process, because it enables even the learners who are not so proficient to engage in this. And then, what do you want to know about celebrations? It's very interesting to think that we are raised in our bubble. In the first year I was teaching in the previous company of summer schools in Sipford, I had a group of Kazakhstani students, and there was a topic on celebrations. And there was May 1st, Christmas, St. Valentine's, Easter. And of course, they recognized St. Valentine's and they recognized Christmas, but they were Muslim. So they looked at me and they said, "What is Easter?" There are not so many films about Easter. So, okay, not very internationally focused. It's interesting to see how learners can ask questions in those respects. And then the last chain, the last link of the chain is what I have learned, where learners get to regroup, rephrase, and transfer the questions that they made into the next column by providing the answers. And this is a great way of making learning personal. So this is our brainstorming regarding cities. This is about Thessaloniki. So as you can see, I designed it on the students' workbook, their notebook. So we were talking about masses of water around big cities. So as you can see, we've got waterfalls, rivers, lakes, and bodies of sea. It wasn't easy to get the learners to realize how geography would fit into English, but it was an interesting task. And the second one, I think, has to do with cities in general. Adjectives to characterize cities, reasons why people choose to live in a city, places in a city, reasons not to like them, problems. And as you can understand, this task is absolutely flexible. We can use it with 2 learners, with 1 learner. We can use it with a huge class in which we can design the cloud, get them to brainstorm the different mini clouds, and each group gets their sub cloud. And the great bonus is that they are using English as they're trying to brainstorm. And even if a little bit of their own native language escapes, it would be easy to get them to switch to English when they present. And it gives them voice. Now, this is the project I was telling you about. This was a project from Oxford Discover 4. And it's a discussion between a person and a part of their body. So they are interviewing a part of their body. I did not like this project. As you can see, even course books that have inspired educators to such great extent as Oxford Discover has inspired me might have a point where the teacher says, "Oh no, my God." To be honest, I was absolutely scared of what the learners could come up with, which part of the body they might choose to interview and what kind of vocabulary they might be using. So I thought, no, forget it. It was a unit on which we did extensive work on how our body works, how viruses take hold of our body, and how we fall sick. There was even a graphic story about presenting the white cells being the ones that fight and the antibodies being the Superman and helping the body regain control. So I thought it's best if we create a flyer. And we started preparing for the flyer through our usual cloud. So how can we protect our health, diet, exercise, bad habits we should avoid? And then they created their flyer, which of course they decorated. It was a project where they could do crafts as well. They could type it or handwriting. In this case, we're talking about adaptation. Supplementation is when we add material. I have a particularly soft spot for vocabulary worksheets, mainly because most course books do not focus on the lexical richness of the text. They go on to expand on this material. They highlight a couple of words, but they don't get the learners to read the text in depth. And in a country where English is not spoken 24/7, and the learners are not inundated with reading materials in English, and where they find reading boring, even in their own native language, I think getting them to go up and down the text 3-4 times, to look for collocations, to look how phrasal verbs are used, to play a memory game with the phrasal verbs, and to guess their meaning in context actually helps them understand. We can also add project work. one of the things I love doing is giving the floor to the learners. Last year we had a unit with my C1 learners. We had a unit on eating vegetables, and there was actually a hint in one of the listening about the idea of ugly vegetables or fruit that is rejected because it doesn't look good. So I took them, I made some research on my own and guided them to visit the Jamie Oliver website, and then they created their own presentations about how we can encourage people not to throw away food, to change their shopping habits, to be more sustainable in the way they cook and the way they go shopping. And they presented inspiring presentations. Why I love them? First of all, they learn how to address an audience. They learn to calibrate their way of presenting. They should know that even if they have understood what they're presenting, their audience is dealing with new ideas. So they need to go slowly and explain. And unless they understand, nobody else is going to understand. They learn how to develop a topic, but also how to be able to expect answers, expect questions from me, make eye contact with their audience. It's the ultimate way of producing a sustained monologue. It's very flexible because it can be done anywhere. I usually give this, apart from what we do in class, they do it as a C1 to C2 class summer project. One article, one TED talk of any topic that you want to present. I have a worksheet through which they know what to outline, and they get to see how to prepare their PowerPoints so that they are not reading material, but actually springboard for presentation. It's a very realistic 21st century skill. More things can happen if we have time. So this is Klimt, the woman in gold, painted somewhere between 1903 and 1907. And it's interesting to get the learners to talk about the woman before they find the story of the Bloch-Bauers. And of course, we discuss these questions, and then they can do a group work or pair work on the painting. They can research online the history of the painting. It will definitely lead them to the film. Then they can watch the film as part of their flipped classroom. And then they can do anything from write a review to interview Maria Bloch-Bauer, and discuss the idea of being dispossessed and losing your family home, and the idea behind the film. Of course, this is for a C2 class. So I'm not sure if you're in the mood to chat, and I would love it if you are, or if there are any questions. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for inviting me. It's a great start to my year, and it's always a great way to maintain links and connections with Poland. So please send me your questions, or ask them away now, or even email me, and I will be very happy to hear from you all.
Thank you, Maria. This has been a really exhaustive approach to the subject matter of your webinar, but we all enjoyed listening to you as usual.
I'm sorry the presentation was so long. The PDFs, yes, I will send you the actual version, the finalized version. I will send it to Marcin and Lucina so that you can get it through the through IATEFL Poland. And dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję bardzo. Pozdrawiam serdecznie. Thank you so much. And we are already looking forward to your next webinar for IATF Poland. So keep in touch. There will be a conference for sure, if not the traditional version, then online.
Amen.
So there is always an opportunity
sure.
to participate and develop your volunteering skills.
Thank you so much. I don't like saying do zobaczenia, but Do zobaczenia. See you next year, if not earlier.
See
Bye
you.
bye
Bye
from
bye.
Greece.
Bye. Bye.